So welcome to my multimodal narrative video, where I wanted to talk about my experience of learning German. So just an overview of what we'll be going over in the video. I'll start with my introduction and start talking about why I chose German in the first place. Then we'll move on to the learning tool that I used, which was Duolingo, and I'll be talking about my experiences with that. Then we'll move on to the actual learning experience itself and how I felt about it. And then finally, I'll end with some course connections. So I'll begin with an introduction. So as I mentioned, for this assignment, I chose to learn German. And in terms of why, I think that most people, when they were choosing a language, wanted to base it off of their heritage. And I wanted to do the same. However, my heritage is mostly English. And, well, I already know English. And so this posed a bit of a problem for me. However, I know that English is a Germanic language that has a heavy influence from French. And that really, the language is comprised of these two sources. It's about half Latin, French, and about the other half is Germanic-based. So I thought it might be interesting to learn one of those languages that had a great influence on English in order to better understand my native language. But because I've already done a lot of French in school, I thought I would try to do the other half, the Germanic part. And so I decided to learn German. Now I know that modern day German that's spoken today is very different from the Germanic roots that English sprouted from, but it's a close approximation, and while learning German, I definitely noticed the similarities. So now I'll move on to the learning tools. So as an overview of my learning process, I used both a language learning app for about 4 of the 6 hours, and then for the last 2 hours, I was consuming German media. And the learning tool that I used was the language learning app Duolingo. And Duolingo is the most popular language learning app in the world, right? It has over 500 million registered users, 37 million of which are active users each month. And it's really no surprise why, because it's an app that's fun, it's easy to use, and it's helpful to offer a good start to learning a language. But I thought I'd go over some of its pros and cons that I experienced while using the app and learning German on it. So for some pros of Duolingo, a major one right off the bat is that it's free to use, right? Cost can often be a barrier to learning, but that isn't the case here because it's completely free and offers a great experience. Next is the gamification element. When you're playing the game, it feels like a video game more than learning. It doesn't feel like work, it just feels like fun, which is great. And then also sort of related to that, it has some very pleasing aesthetics and has like nice cartoon visuals, and also this like cast of recurring characters that kind of learn the language with you, which kind of makes it fun, right? And also it has a very well implemented reward system and progression system, right? There are various trophies and unlockable achievements, as well as other like affirmations to keep you motivated and feeling positive about the experience, because I think that motivation is one of the biggest parts to learning a language, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are or how quickly you learn things. If you're not motivated to keep going, then you're not going to be learning very well. And so they do a great job at keeping you motivated and offering you these little tokens and treats that make you feel good. But for some cons to Duolingo, while it is free to play, there are limits to that freeness. For example, you only get a certain number of mistakes per day, right? Every time you make a mistake, you lose a heart, and you have to wait for hours for that heart to regenerate and to try again. Versus if you pay, then you get unlimited time and unlimited attempts at making mistakes. So it's free to use to an extent, I guess. Another sort of issue with it that I noticed was that it wasn't super comprehensive with grammar, and it's much more vocabulary based than grammar based. And with German, that seems to be, that might be a bit of an issue because the grammar of German is really quite difficult. I felt a lot like the Duolingo bird here trying to understand the German grammar. Right? He says so müde, which means so tired, because it is quite tiring and difficult to learn German grammar. And Duolingo wasn't super effective in teaching it, I didn't think. And so I think overall, it's probably not comprehensive enough to become fluent in a language from just using Duolingo, but I think that it's probably best as like a fun tool to assist with a more serious language learning effort. That's sort of what my overall conclusion would be about the app after having used it now for a number of hours. And so next I'll move on to my learning experience and how I actually thought the process went. Because overall, I thought it went really well, even though it was sometimes challenging. But importantly, I enjoyed it. The hardest part, I think, seems to be the grammar, as I mentioned. In particular, German's genders, grammatical genders, are really quite confusing. Right? English is my native language, which has no genders. And then I'm also familiar with French, which has 2 genders. But German takes it a step further and has 3. They have both the masculine, feminine, and then a new neuter gender, which was new to me. But in terms of the vocabulary, I didn't think the vocabulary was too bad picking up the words. Because English is also a Germanic language, there are many words that were similar to English, what's known as a cognate. So for example, mother is Mutter in German, brother is Bruder. Words like forbidden are verboten, which are simple to figure out and kind of intuitive to understand. However, one sort of area of trouble when it comes to vocabulary are its compound words. They have these massive, 30-letter words that are going to be really intimidating when you look at them first. Right, like that word at the bottom there, which is from a poster a few years ago that kind of went viral on the internet for how funny it looked. Like, how do you read that? What does it even say? But once you realize that a compound word it's just shorter words put together, it really isn't that bad, and it's not really that different from saying like 3 words after each other. It's just taking out the spaces, but it's kind of the same thing. So for example, that word at the bottom, it's Abstimmungsbekanntmachung, and it just means like voting notice or voting announcement, and it's really not that bad then once you realize that. And then finally, in terms of pronunciation and accent, I thought that I was able to pick it up okay. I think some of the phonemes, though, I definitely need more practice on, especially the R's I found to be difficult. The German R is similar to the French guttural R, like the ch, but it's not quite the same because it's not as like far back in the throat, I don't think. It's a little bit more forward, but not as forward as like the English one. It's kind of in between, and I found it difficult to sort of reproduce that sound. So if I'm going to keep going at German, I definitely need to practice that more. Finally, I wanted to make some connections to our course content. First, there was the water lily metaphor from week 2 that I was thinking a lot about when I was doing this German language learning process. What this metaphor speaks to is how development of a second language does not tarnish our skills or development of our first language, which is a common misconception that comes up with language learning, because rather the second language grows healthily out of the first. Because just from this short learning journey of just 6 hours, I still was able to notice how this water lily metaphor could be accurate. I tried to learn German not just through Duolingo, but also through like immersive strategies such as watching German news broadcasts. And this helped a lot to see the words and phrases in context and how actual Germans speak and use them on a day-to-day basis. And I also listened to music with German lyrics and was reading the lyrics as they were going, because a lot of classical music is written in German, and I like to listen to classical music sometimes. So I was listening to parts of Mozart's Die Zauberflöte, Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, and Beethoven's Ode an die Freude. But then taking these songs and relating them back into English, back into my native language, it helped me to understand what they meant better. And so I think that the water lily metaphor is really accurate, and it reminds me that it's okay if students are using their native language to help them learn English, and that strict classroom rules of, English only, they aren't very productive. And another course connection that came up a lot were cognates and false cognates, right? So cognates, I mentioned before, there are 2 words that are the same or similar across 2 languages, and there are many examples between German and English, right? I said before that brother is Bruder, mother is Mutter. But then there are also false cognates, or false friends, which is kind of the opposite, where there are 2 words that seem like they should be the same based on the way they sound, but actually mean something completely different. And I came across a number of sort of fun examples in German. So for example, Brand in German means fire. College in German means colleague, not like university. Objective in German is a camera lens. A Rat is a counsel. And then most famously, a gift in German is poison in English. So I thought those were fun. And again, things you have to be careful about when you're speaking German. You don't want to just assume, or else you might end up saying some very silly things. But anyway, that concludes my video, and I'll leave you with a message here in German. Damit ist mein Video beendet. Ich danke Ihnen für das Zuhören. Und danke, dass Sie einen so wunderbaren Kurs unterrichten. Which means that concludes my video. Thank you for listening, and thank you for teaching such a wonderful course.